Hello, this is Lighting Generations, a father-son podcast with James Simpson and Mike Simpson. Thank you very much for the comments and things from the first two episodes. We really liked hearing them and it's motivated us to make some more. So we are back with our third episode and we are going to continue talking about some of Mike's very special projects. And this time, what would you like to talk about?
Well, we talked a bit last time about Tower Bridge. We could follow that on with St Paul's.
St Paul's is a good one. It was about the same sort of time, wasn't it? So
It was a year later. In fact, the motivation was it was the 800th year of the Lord Mayor of London.
Mm-hmm.
And the city wanted to do something to mark the occasion, apart from their other events that they had on.
Mm-hmm.
Having just done Tower Bridge, which had been successful.
Yeah.
The other idea that they had was to, if you like, donate a new lighting scheme to the Cathedral over London. So that was the next project.
And so did it come off the back of Tower Bridge? Was it the same people? Because it's still City of London.
It was the same team. Yeah, we had, if you like, the client was the same. It was still Basil Austin at the City of London.
Yep.
We had London Electricity who were doing the installation, and ourselves as the equipment supplier and design.
So you didn't have a tendering process for that one?
Not for St Paul's, no.
Oh, okay. So straight to the guys that you know will do a good job.
Well, hopefully that's what they thought.
Now I remember learning about St Paul's Cathedral's lighting from my tutor during my lighting design degree and going, I know all about this because my dad lit it. And then he explained something to me and I went, I did not know that was the plan, and it was the moonlighting effect.
It was the moonlighting. So when I talk about the architect, it's not the architect. You know.
Well, Christopher Wren.
No, it wasn't Christopher.
No,
we didn't.
Been gone for a while.
We didn't consult him.
I'm sure he'd be interested to know what's happening.
But just as with Tower Bridge, there was consultant architect. St Paul's had a consultant architect who oversaw everything that goes on in the cathedral to make sure that it is appropriate, there's no damage to the structure and things like that. And his words, and I can almost remember them word for word, because that was absolutely the inspiration. He said, well, imagine how Wren would have seen St Paul's at night, because there's no artificial lighting, and the only light you would have seen it by was moonlight. And that was the key, because moonlight is a cool white light. It's only coming from a single direction. And that was the inspiration, if you like, for the design that we did. Except you couldn't have lit it only, I think, from one direction, because anyone on the other half of the city wouldn't have seen it at all.
No.
So we came from two directions, but they were from opposite corners of the cathedral.
And
so
that must have left a bit of a scallop down the middle then.
there was a scallop that was left down the middle. And if you look at it, if you still look at it today on the dome, you'll still see that scallop. Jumping forward a bit, what happened was, I'll carry on with the story. I'll carry on with the story.
They'll listen.
So at the time, it was lit. It was lit in high pressure sodium, as everything else in the City of London was.
Yeah.
So when you
that horrible yellow monochromatic.
No, not monochromatic.
Oh, high pressure sodium.
High pressure sodium.
So it's a slightly ambery colour.
Yes.
It's not the really thick orange. It's this sort of warm, but it gets rid of all the colour, doesn't it?
It gets rid of most of the colour, and also it was at that time being used extensively for street lighting.
Yes.
Because it was the most efficient source for lighting streets. So in terms of colour, the cathedral didn't stand out. It just blended into the rest of the yellow glow.
I mean, and I always think that St Paul's Cathedral is quite a bluey stone.
It's a light stone. It's a light coloured stone. Yes.
So, like, if in colour temperature terms, it's a cool stone, not a warm stone like high pressure
sodium. You wouldn't naturally choose high pressure sodium as a light source for it.
Why would they have used high pressure sodium initially?
Well, when you looked at the equipment, it was originally lit with floodlights that would have taken probably a 1500 watt tungsten light source, which happened to have an E40 cap, and if you unscrew a 1500 watt tungsten, you can screw in a high pressure sodium lamp. You just have to put some remote gear.
Okay.
So
it was a cheap way of getting a lot of lights.
it was a cheap way of actually of saving energy. Now, that would have been the driver at that time. There was a lot of use of high pressure sodium, even in industry. People were replacing the older mercury or tungsten light sources with high pressure sodium, and using them for workplaces. Not something that we would do today.
Yeah.
But particularly during the 70s, there was a real drive for energy efficiency.
Yes. Unfortunately, at the same time, created this horrible orange glow over everything.
Yes, yeah.
I can remember taking my A-levels in a sports hall that was lit with high pressure sodium and not being able to read the paper properly.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's absolutely correct. So the cathedral was lit with high pressure sodium. Some of it came from within the grounds of the cathedral itself that they owned, but an awful lot of it was coming from adjacent buildings.
Right. Because it's quite enclosed, isn't it? I mean, it's as a building, it's...
You've got a lot of buildings that are all the way around.
Yeah.
So the problem with that was that there was, I think they say every so often, a third of the City of London is redeveloped. So buildings are continually being taken down and replaced with new buildings. And every time that happened, very often you lost a bit of the lighting because it was on the roof of that building.
Yeah.
You had a sort of what we call a way leave, so you had permission to put the lighting there and to run your power up to power it. So it was this yellow colour. It was had gaps in it all the way round. And the other thing that the cathedral authorities said was, we'd really like as much as possible all the lighting to be on our property. So we've got control of it. So we're not, going to be affected by all the redevelopment that was going on.
Yeah.
So that was another factor that that influenced the design. So coming back to the concept then, yes, the light was going to come from principally two directions, and that was easy to do on the dome, and down on the ground, in the grounds of the cathedral itself, there was a flow of light that went in those two directions. So although the lights went all the way around the cathedral, they were directed to give you that same flow of light on the lower walls. And as you say, that meant on the two opposite sides, you were getting a sort of a shadow that ran down. I think on the dome, it helped to really emphasise the shape and the roundness of the dome.
Yes.
You see it from a distance. But on the walls, particularly the side of the cathedral that was river facing, you did see quite a noticeable dark element that came down, which wasn't so noticeable until they built the Millennium Bridge, the wobbly bridge.
Okay.
And one of the buildings
directly in line with
one of the buildings that came down was exactly in line with that, and they opened up a new vista.
Yes.
So suddenly you had this view from the bridge through the buildings of the city to St Paul's.
But that wasn't when you were lighting it. That came
Later. That was later. So there's that was something. I mean,
it happened later on.
It happened later on. Yeah.
So how did you make it not like more lights were missing? Like you can have a black gap where the lights are coming from two different directions. And previously, people have got used to this, all these gaps in the lights around the building because buildings have been knocked down and there's nowhere to put the new lights. So how did your concept not look like that?
So we did on that side of the cathedral, we did put a couple of lights on lampposts that were there, not to completely wash out, but to soften the shadow effect. So it really wasn't light and dark; it was a softening of the shadow as you came round.
And that's a very theatrical approach to sculpting architecture.
Well, I think when you're lighting something architecturally, it's a mixture between the art that you'd see in the theatre and the science that perhaps you would use in more conventional architectural lighting. I mean, the thing about a theatre is that if it doesn't look right, you can dim the light up and down, you can move it, you can change the beam shape, you can put a colour filter in.
Yes.
When you've dug a hole in the ground and someone has spent a lot of time putting a cable in, you can't move it.
Yes.
So one of the things that we did in St Paul's, and I'd say that you always do on any project, of course you do some trials, you get some equipment out and you have a look to see how it goes. And in particular in the case of St Paul's, when they're doing the electrical installation, they left some extra cable. So we placed the floodlights, or we indicated where we thought the floodlights would go. But one evening they powered everything up, and we went up and we made some final adjustments. So we were able to move the floodlights 5 meters or so in either direction to sort of fine tune it. And then when we'd got that right, and we got the look right, we got the shadows right, then we could say, right, now you can finish, digging the hole in the pit to put the floodlight in.
Okay, so actually, the design with the lights came first, but in reality, it wasn't just that you looked at a plan and went, I think the holes need to be here, 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 and then you turn up and hope that your planning worked. You actually did a theatrical system on it. Go, let's position the lights, check it looks okay, get client approval, presumably, and then they dug the hole.
And then they dug the hole.
It's normally it's the other way around, right?
Well, yeah, I think, as I said, I think it depends on the type of the scale of building that you're doing. Interesting.
So, how did you do the planning for it? Because 3D pre-visualization, which is something that we both like talking about, that didn't exist in computer terms.
Yeah.
When you did this. So, what methods were available to you in, when was this, 1989?
This was 1988. Well, first of all, I should say that any of the people who studied on the master's course at the Bartlett will be able to answer this question, because
good. Well, hopefully they're watching this.
We've had this as a case study, because it's really nice to be able to explain the design process and then also be able to go out and see the actual building. So it's a combination of a number of things. So first of all, you have to work out what sort of lighting level you're going to use. So the fact that we were moving from a warm light source to a cool light source, and that then the City of London was lit with high pressure sodium. So by moving to a cooler light source, which was the moonlight, the metal halide, you're getting a colour contrast. We looked at the typical lighting levels that were being used around the city, and from that, if you look at the guides, it'll tell you what sort of light level you should be doing. So we were aiming for 100 lux on the walls, the facade of the cathedral.
That's quite high, isn't it, for an architectural building?
Well, don't forget that in the City of London, the average street lighting level was 40 lux.
Oh, okay, so it does stand out.
It was already quite bright in the surroundings. Now, again, since then, there's a whole lighting strategy that the City of London have done. So we're talking about 1988, not 2025.
Yeah. So
having worked out how much light you want on the cathedral, you can sort of work backwards and say, how many lumens do you need on a piece of the wall? And then you can start to look at your equipment and say, well, what's going to give me that lumen output? And you could have had lots of small floodlights or a fewer bigger floodlights. And then the other thing you have to look at is the coverage. So what beam angles can you use or are available to you to achieve the lighting that you need on the wall? So you're using the lumens that you need and the beam angles, and then you start to look at the equipment, and then you can come back and work out, well, using this equipment, we're going to get that lighting level and it's going to cover this much of the cathedral. So therefore we need another pair here, another pair here, and you can work your way around the cathedral.
I mean, a designer today would listen to what you're just describing and go, well, that's what I do in Dialux. But what you're talking about is actually protractor drawing out, this is the beam angle.
It's a protractor drawing a beam angle, but I would say, yes, you could do it in Dialux, but you've got to work out what bit of equipment you're going to use to put into Dialux. And what this process does is it helps you select the right bit of equipment. Then when you finally want to do a calculation, of course you can say, right, well, this floodlight here at this distance and at this angle, and there's your facade, you can calculate what it's going to give you. But there's always a little bit of me that, for this type of application, that says, if you start producing numbers, you can get really hung up on numbers.
Yeah.
And you go, oh, you know, I wanted 100 and I've got 95.
Yes.
And actually, the eye can only really start to pick up ratios of 2 to 1.
Mm-hmm.
So you could say you could almost have 100 lux here and 50 lux here, and the eye wouldn't see it.
Right.
It's not, that's a bit extreme. But I think that if you're not careful using computer programs, you can overthink things a little bit. And particularly if you've been out on site.
Yes.
As part of this process, we worked out that actually to light a piece of the facade, you needed 2 floodlights, you needed a wide beam at the bottom and a narrow beam at the top.
Mm-hmm.
And when you look at the cathedral, there is a natural architectural line that flows around the middle of the cathedral. And that was quite a nice way of almost disguising where the 2 floodlights beams would meet.
Mm.
So when you move them, you can see the beams, but when they're static, you don't see anything. You just read a completely uniform.
I mean, even with today's visualization tools, that sort of distinction, that understanding will only happen if you're really there and looking at actual light responding in the real environment.
Yeah.
As much as we love visualization, and I think that there is a caveat to what I just said. Considering this is my world as well, I don't want to do myself out of work. But the advantage that I bring to visualization when I'm doing it is that I understand light. I like to think anyway. So when you see something on, a facade, and you go, that's how it's going to look, and I go, actually, I think it's going to look like this because I have experience of light.
Yeah.
And I think again that's still to your point that you can rely on computers and numbers too much, particularly when you haven't got that,
that feel,
that experience gives you.
Feel for light. I think the other thing is that we use visualization because you've got something in your head. You just said it's in my head. Mm-hmm. How do you communicate that to somebody who doesn't understand lux, doesn't understand lumens, doesn't really know all the technical things? He's got a picture. Yeah. So you're trying to communicate the picture in your head to someone who is, from lighting terms, the man in the street. Yeah. And that's where visualization is useful. So in the particular example of St. Paul's, how do we communicate how we thought it would look? We were lucky enough to find a little scale model of the cathedral in the crypt. Yeah. So we went in there with the sort of lighting that you'd use in a shop.
It's fibre optics?
No, it wasn't fibre optics.
Okay.
No, they're little halogen spots.
Right.
And we put a blue curtain up at the back and we lit that with blue to give you the effect of a blue sky. Mm-hmm. And we had light coming from the 2 directions as we had predicted we wanted the design to go. And then we took photographs of the model. Mm. And I think if you looked at the model, and I've shown the photographs to people, if you don't tell them, they think it's a real cathedral because it was a very good model. So using that and this sort of setup, we're able to show the client this is what we mean. So when we talk about cool moonlight light coming in from just 2 directions, creating this soft wash over the cathedral, this is what we mean. And you could see the picture and you could see what it was that we were doing, and it matched their aspiration. Yeah,
that's sometimes finding the model in the crypt might be a lot cheaper as well than having to hire an artist to do concept art or to get a 3D visualization done. When what you need is the lights you've already got access to as a manufacturer of them.
Yeah.
One thing that I always remember is something that irked you was when they projected something onto the dome.
I think it was Mars.
No, it was Whisper.
Oh, Whisper.
Because it was a whispering gallery.
Oh, that's right, yes.
And I just remember thinking, I thought it was permanently down, that's why you're upset, but it was just a temporary advertising. Why did that bother you so much?
I think it's because, the cathedral is seen by millions of people that come to visit London. Yeah. I've stood at Charing Cross, and you can see right across. You don't see the lower part of the cathedral, but you see the dome.
Yes.
And you go, well, for that moment in time, all the people that have come to London, instead of seeing another one of our iconic structures, we're seeing this piece of advertising,
Yeah, a bit crass.
Yeah.
It's interesting because when I quite like that period in history. I like reading about that period in history where Wren was rebuilding London, and the city was completely destroyed.
Yeah.
He designed the whole thing with St Paul's Cathedral in the centre, and it was deliberately the tallest building for miles, so that it stood out and made London look iconic, because it's this dome that was an engineering marvel at the time, and not just in the fact they managed to build it at all, but the way it performed acoustically when you're in it. It was a very important part of London's restoration after the fire, and what became later the Industrial Revolution that came shortly afterwards, and the renaissance of the science of the time, Newton and Huygens, and all the wonderful things that was happening. So St Paul's Cathedral sort of represents quite a lot to the City of London in that period, because it came at a time of the Renaissance, and I always liked the idea that London was kept low for hundreds of years so that St Paul's Cathedral would remain the tallest building in the city. And Canary Wharf was very deliberately built down the road in Docklands so that St Paul's Cathedral remained the biggest thing.
You know that there are protected views of St Paul's Cathedral.
Yes, I do, yes.
So I think there's one from Hampstead Heath, there's one from, I think, the Tower of London, there's one from the Royal Observatory. And if you look at those protected views, you'll see that they form a little, there's a gap, if you like, within the City of London, which those protected views don't cross. And that's where all the tall buildings are built. So if you look at the City of London now, you see all the new tall buildings, they're all clustered so as to retain those protected views from St Paul's Cathedral.
Apart from one.
Apart from one that was
built in the wrong place.
Yeah, I think it was a mistake. I think it was before they instituted all their protected views.
Oh dear.
Maybe we shouldn't go there too far. But the other thing, I mean, linking back to the discussion we had last time about the theatre, reading Richard Pilbar's book about how the National Theatre grew where it is at the moment, you see quite often the architect, Dennis Lasdon, mentioning how from the outside walkways around the theatre, you have a view of St Paul's. So that's something that even he was thinking about when they were planning the National Theatre.
But that was before you'd lit it?
Yes.
In the 70s?
Yes, that's 60s, right.
70s.
Yes, yeah.
So, I mean, this was a year after an iconic London landmark had been lit, Tower Bridge, and now you had another one just down the road, and actually both of them could be seen in the same vista, pretty much, if you got to the right place in South Bank.
Yeah.
How was your ego at that point? You must have thought that you're this, fantastic lighting designer lighting up all of, Britain's greatest landmarks.
Honestly, I don't know that I have an ego like that.
No, you definitely don't have an ego. No.
But I mean, all I can say is that, I mean, the scheme has been upgraded in terms of the equipment, the hardware, but the concept is still there in terms of the direction of light, the colour and the shadowing and things like that.
It still looks the same as I remember it.
And it still looks the same. So it's not really an ego, but it's just something that is very nice to look back on work that you've done and see that it's still around and still being appreciated.
Yes. It's another one of those ones that keeps popping up in films, and that's interestingly, it's unlike Tower Bridge, which would only get used in the lit look in films where it's set in today, 1980s. But St Paul's Cathedral regularly gets used in historical dramas, where it's set in 1700 something. It wasn't lit back then. They didn't have electric lights, but they still use it because there's something about the lighting that's so natural.
Yeah.
That it feels like it could be part of that world, which was probably the intention. And
well, yeah, that was it. As I said, it goes right the way back to how you would see it in moonlight.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe if we could turn all the other lighting off around it. Actually, probably the first thing you do is say, well, it does need to be quite so bright.
Yes.
As it is now. But I mean, the dome. So the dome was actually lit to a slightly higher level. At the target, or the average target, was about 150 lux. But again, the concept for that, or the way the design process was to look for the right light source, the right beam width, so that you could cover all the dome and have this effect. And particularly the cross right at the very top of the dome, to highlight to highlight that. And you see that from a distance. So the rest of the cathedral, once you get a distant view, you don't really see it, but the dome you can see for quite a good way around that part of the river.
Yeah. Well, certainly, growing up, it was one of those buildings that you always recognised as being one of Dad's lighting. And actually, it was I think 3 years ago. My wife and I stayed in a hotel just outside St Paul's just before Christmas, and I said to her, like, we'd never stay in London. Like, we live 6 miles away, so we always commute home. But this was like, a Christmas treat. And I said to her, I want to go and see the lighting. Even though I've seen it at night, but we're staying there, and it just happened to be snowing, and it was just deserted. It was like 2 days before Christmas. There was nobody around. It was dead of night in the city on a Sunday. Snow was falling over St Paul's Cathedral, and the lights were on, but it felt like a Victorian romance. You really felt like this was it was just picture perfect.
Yeah.
And the lighting made it that. It wasn't the snow on its own. It wasn't the fact it was deserted. It was just that it had that picture that you'd expect. Yeah. Yeah. So there are other buildings that you've lit in London, but there's probably one that's a little bit more, I wouldn't say celebrated, but it's probably a bit more famous than St Paul's Cathedral. Well, certainly the people that live in it are more famous.
You're talking about the place at the end of the Mall?
Yeah, there's that little, hovel down the end where quite a lot of gates and policemen walk around.
Yeah.
It's all at Buckingham Palace.
Yeah, yeah.
So you lit Buckingham Palace, and that was actually a bit more recent. But I remember this. This is interesting to me because this was after I'd started working in lighting, I think.
Yes.
But it was also at the era when LED was just starting to emerge.
Absolutely.
So that's an interesting story because you've got this, compared to the other ones we talked about, which were all about big discharge lights, this was an architectural style that would probably lend itself better to the techniques you were using for the other buildings. But this was a basically what I'm trying to say. This is a very significant building with a very particular style that you were lighting with a new technology.
Yeah, and what that new technology gave us was new opportunities.
Oh, okay.
So I've got some photographs of, there's various photographs of Buckingham Palace that have been lit up. Mainly it was done for events, so like, Festival of Britain going back, and other things. And I'm not talking about where they were using projection.
Yeah, like the Queen's Diamond Jubilee and Golden Jubilee.
Not things like that, but it was just being floodlit. And it was a classic example of saying, well, if I'm looking at the Buckingham Palace from the Mall, the light needs to come from the side to give you modelling. If the light's coming from the same direction, then you lose all your modelling.
Right. So just to explain what that is, right? So if you're looking down from the Mall and you've lit the building from the same direction you're looking at it from, you won't see shadows.
It'll look flat.
So
the
flat,
facade will look flat.
But you want to bring out all that detail, so that's why you light it from the side.
The light comes in from the side, and the same principles you apply to all the buildings that you're lighting. So it had been lit before, but apparently the Queen wasn't happy for the building to be lit, even though her apartments are down the side, along the sort of Green Park side. But I don't think she was desperately keen. It was lit for occasions, but not permanently.
Right. This was about her sort of opinion of the building shouldn't be too prominent in London, or it's...
I don't know honestly what the reason was. Whether it was felt that the light was obtrusive, or it suddenly turned it into a tourist attraction, which to be honest it is.
Yeah.
So we went along to have a look at how you would light it. And when you look at the facade, there's a central balcony that everyone knows. And then you get two flat facades, and then at either end, there's another little colonnade and a pediment on the top. So the idea was to light the columns with conventional spotlights, if you like, but what the LED technology gave us was this type of light that we take for granted now, but it's like a wall grazer. So very narrow, very thin, that can produce a flat beam of light that you can shine up a facade. So it's a very good way of lighting a facade, bringing out all the modelling and texture of the facade itself, with the equipment not being obtrusive. So we wanted to use this type of equipment on the facade itself. But if you looked at the stone, it's quite a warm coloured stone.
It's like a yellowy colour, isn't it?
Yeah.
A bit like Parliament. It's
Yeah, so
not quite as yellow as Parliament, but it's that same sort of...
that's, yes.
Yeah.
It's like a sort of, yeah.
I'm trying to name the rock now, but I can't.
Yeah, it's not quite a sandstone, but it's
Yes, that's what I was thinking, yeah.
that sort of tone. And up until then, this was very early in the days of LED, when everything was cold and white. And I think you remember, when LEDs first came out, everyone was referring to it as that cold, white, harsh light. And the reason it was cold and white was that particular colour was the most efficient.
And you get the most intensity.
You get the most intensity out of it. So everything that was being done with LED that was white tended to be cold. But we said, no, we want something that is warm.
Right.
So at least in terms of Philips, we went to the factory. They're already beginning to look at other LED chips that we could use. We said we want some warm light, warm white colour.
So this is really early in LED generation.
So Buckingham, for Buckingham Palace. And I think that swayed the development people a little bit to make some samples. So we took some samples up there one evening. We were out in the courtyard of Buckingham Palace with these LEDs and with these other light sources. Because for the other ones, it was where you're going to position them. Do you have them on the ground where you've got people walking around? Or do you put them on the balcony where they're going to be best placed? Is it actually possible to bury them in the ground, have buried uplighters on there? So we're experimenting with several different positions, looking at the effect of the shadows to give us the best view, and then using these warm wall glazes on the main facade.
So did you have anything that wasn't LED?
Yeah, the lights on the columns
The spots.
were CDM, so a warm metal halide, so 3000K metal halide, and then the LEDs were used to wash along the facade itself.
Okay, so I remember at the time there was when it got turned on, the news got hold of this is the era of saving energy, and you had to respond to something, I think, didn't you? Was there a comment that you had to make?
I think there was a comment. I mean, again, the story was that this was going to be done as a present for the Queen for her 80th birthday, just to put it in time. I don't know if they actually said, Your Majesty, here's a
Happy
present.
birthday.
Yeah, happy.
Blow your candles out. Lead line goes off.
Happy birthday. But I think there were some headlines, more to do with it being lit as against not being lit, as against the style of the lighting.
No, it wasn't the look, it was the fact that it was an excessive use of energy at a time when we're trying to be energy conscious.
Yes. So we responded by saying the energy that you're using is the equivalent to boiling a kettle. Yeah. And suddenly people went, is that all? Yeah. I mean, going back to Tower Bridge, so again, we're talking about 1987, the cost of lighting Tower Bridge was £5 a night. And people just don't have any perception as to how little energy you need to achieve some of these effects on buildings. So yes, of course, it's using energy. Yeah. And if you want to save energy, you turn it off, but it's nowhere near the amount of energy that the average man in the street would think about.
Yes. No, I mean, I knew that from the Opera House, 3 substations, and 2 of them were used exclusively for the performance lighting, and everyone said, well, let's change your performance lighting to LED, it will save a lot of energy. Yeah. Actually, 2% of the energy for the entire building was the theatre lighting, and of that included the house lights. Yeah. Most of it was air conditioning.
Yeah.
And that's the case most of the time. So, the argument that lighting is a contributor to the carbon emissions of the country, it's actually valid.
Yeah.
We have responsibility. Obviously, we're drawing energy, but it's sometimes there's gains that can be made.
Well, I think that in terms of civic pride
Yes.
and things like that, they're things that it's difficult to put an equation on. But I've mentioned that throughout my career, working on these projects has just given you the opportunity to go to places that you wouldn't normally go to.
Yeah.
And in the case of Buckingham Palace, one of the rows is all along the first floor at on the balconies, just on the balconies. So when we came to commission, we had to go into all the bedrooms, all the rooms on that first floor of Buckingham Palace, including the main balcony.
The balcony.
The main balcony.
Wow.
So,
you got to see some things.
We got to see. Didn't see anybody.
Did you meet any royals?
Well,
Yes, you did.
Not directly. But when we were doing our trials in the front courtyard, and we got lights, obviously they weren't finely positioned, but there are lights all over there. This car came in, did a sort of a handbrake turn on the gravel. The window went down, and one of the royal equerries that was with us went over to the window. And you just heard his voice saying, "What's going on here?" He said, "Oh, we're doing lighting." And apparently...
Which member of the royal do
I can't possibly say. Apparently the comment came back, "Well, it's glaring,
Yeah.
You should light it from above, not from below."
Just hang it from the clouds.
Hang it off the sky, yeah. Anyway, the car disappeared, and we carried on with our work, and about 20 minutes later, this equerry's phone goes, and you could see a window right at the top where there's a light on, and apparently the comment was, "I told you, it's bright, it's glaring." Well, of course, you're looking out of the window, you're looking down straight into the beam of LEDs that are coming out the front of the window.
I remember a story about when they did projection map Buckingham Palace for I forget which Queen's Diamond Jubilee, the one that had Madhouse projected across it. And this was a brand new technology being used in a completely new way on Buckingham Palace. It's twice it's been used as a landmark moment. But I remember there was a similar complaint made by a similar royal, and because projection mapping is so clever, it knows where the windows are. They just turned off all the windows, and then during their testing, they just had all these black holes where the windows were. So I don't think this is a one-off that happened. But what is interesting is that the use of LED on such a prominent building at that point, particularly as Philips were, now Signify, but Philips at the time, were very heavily invested into LEDs as a technology. This must have been a bit of a landmark moment and actually a fantastic sales pitch for the state of LEDs.
Well, I think it helped push them from, there's this new technology we don't quite know, is it going to catch on, isn't it going to catch on, to this must be mainstream.
Yeah.
And again, a little bit like St Paul's, now whenever there's an event on that involves Buckingham Palace, you see it on the news.
Yep.
You'll see the reporter standing in front of it, and the lighting is the same as it was when we put it in.
When was it you did it?
Early
2000s.
It was early 2000. It would have been 2003, 2004, somewhere round about there.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, that's another example of a landmark building, but also a landmark shift in technology use, and maybe we can attribute some of the success of LEDs as an industry to the fact that it was bravely used on such a prominent building, because more risk-averse people might have opted for a more established technology.
Yeah.
And it would be lit quite blandly, as you said.
But I think, as I said, what the LEDs gave us was a whole new range of beams. And I think the effect, you couldn't have achieved the same effect with what was then the traditional technology that we were using.
Yeah. Brilliant. Great. Well, let's leave it there for this episode. I think that's two very inspiring stories of two different buildings. And in the next episode, we're going to tackle some of these technological shifts that happen in time as well. So come back for the next episode. Thank you.
Thank you.